A storm batters the coast of England. The year is 1831. A young man, just 22, stands on the deck of a ship called HMS Beagle. His hair is windswept, his eyes fixed on the endless horizon. He does not know it yet. But this voyage will change the way humanity understands life itself. His name, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is one of history's most controversial and revolutionary thinkers. He was not a warrior, not a king, not even a man of politics. He was a curious observer, a collector of facts, a quiet thinker who dared to question the unquestionable. For centuries, people believed species were fixed, that life was unchanging, that God had created every bird, every fish, every flower exactly as it appeared. But Darwin would challenge this. He would argue that life evolves, that all creatures, including humans, share a common ancestry. This is not just the story of a scientist. It is the story of doubt, of courage, of discovery, the story of Charles Darwin, the man who unraveled the mystery of evolution. Charles Robert Darwin was born on February 12, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England. He came from a wealthy family. His father, Robert Darwin, was a successful doctor. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was a well-known thinker and poet who had already suggested some radical ideas about life. But young Charles was no genius in the classroom. As a boy, he collected beetles, rocks, and fossils instead of memorizing Latin verses. Teachers called him lazy, yet in his heart, he was restless. He wanted to know how the world worked. At the age of 16, Charles was sent to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. But he fainted at the sight of surgery. The medical profession was not for him. His father then sent him to Cambridge University to study theology. The plan? For Charles to become a clergyman. Ironically, this decision would lead him closer to science. At Cambridge, he fell under the influence of naturalists like John Stevens Henslow, a professor of botany. Henslow recognized Darwin's passion for collecting plants, insects, and shells. He encouraged him, trained him, and finally recommended him for a journey that would change his life forever. That journey began with an invitation. The British Navy was preparing a surveying mission around the world on the ship HMS Beagle. They needed a naturalist, someone to study plants, animals, rocks, and geography. At first, Darwin's father refused. He thought it was a waste of time. But eventually his uncle persuaded him, and Charles received permission to join the expedition. On December 27, 1831, the Beagle set sail. Darwin was seasick almost every day. But when the ship reached land, his sickness vanished. He would run to the forests. He would climb mountains. He would marvel at creatures that seemed unlike anything he had seen in England. From the coast of South America to the strange volcanic islands of the Galápagos, Darwin collected thousands of specimens, plants, birds, reptiles, and fossils. He filled notebook after notebook with observations. He studied finches with different beak shapes. He sketched giant tortoises that seemed older than time itself. And slowly, a dangerous thought began to grow inside him. What if species were not fixed? What if they changed over time? In 1836, after nearly 5 years at sea, the Beagle returned to England. Darwin stepped off the ship carrying crates of specimens, notebooks brimming with observations, and a mind bursting with questions. His friends and fellow scientists were impressed. He had fossils of giant sloths and armadillos. He had exotic birds and strange reptiles. But the most important things were not in the crates. They were in his thoughts. Darwin began comparing what he had seen: finches with different beaks, tortoises with unique shells. Each island had its own variations. Why? At the time, the belief was clear. Species were created once by God and never changed. But Darwin saw evidence to the contrary. He thought, what if species adapted? What if creatures that survived passed on their traits to the next generation? And slowly, over countless generations, they could become new species altogether. This was not just science, it was heresy. In 1838, Darwin read an essay by Thomas Malthus about population growth. Malthus argued that humans reproduce faster than resources allow. Nature, therefore, selects who survives. For Darwin, this was the missing piece. He realized nature itself was the selector. The environment was the judge. He called it natural selection. The idea thrilled him and terrified him. Darwin was not a reckless man. He was cautious, meticulous. He knew his idea would shake the foundations of faith, society, and science itself, so he kept it secret. For more than 20 years, Darwin studied in silence. He collected more data. He experimented with pigeons, with plants, with barnacles. He filled notebooks with theories, diagrams, and doubts. He also worried about his health. Darwin suffered from chronic illness, stomach pain, dizziness, fatigue. Some believe it was stress. Others think it was a tropical disease from his travels. But Darwin kept working, despite his suffering. In private, he shared his ideas with a few trusted friends. The famous geologist Charles Lyell urged him to publish. But Darwin hesitated. He feared scandal. He feared rejection. He feared what would happen to his family's reputation. Then in 1858, something shocking happened. Darwin received a letter from a young naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace had been studying in the Malay archipelago, and he had independently come to the same conclusion. Species evolve through natural selection. Darwin was stunned. For 2 decades, he had guarded this dangerous idea. Now another man had discovered it too. Lyell and other scientists arranged a joint presentation of both Darwin's and Wallace's papers at the Linnean Society of London in 1858. But the event barely caused a ripple. Few understood the magnitude of what had been said. Darwin realized it was time. He could no longer remain silent. In 1859, he published his book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. In November 1859, On the Origin of Species was released to the public. All 1,250 copies sold out on the very first day. Darwin, once a quiet naturalist, was now at the center of a firestorm. Some praised his brilliance, others accused him of blasphemy. The idea that life evolved, that humans were not a divine exception, but part of nature's grand tapestry, shook the Victorian world to its core. The book was dense, filled with careful observations and evidence. Darwin did not openly mention humans in its first edition, but everyone understood the implication. If finches and tortoises could evolve, then so could mankind. Church leaders erupted. Some called Darwin the man who would reduce humans to animals. Theologians claimed his theory destroyed morality, faith in the uniqueness of the soul. Yet many scientists were impressed. Darwin had not just guessed. He had spent decades collecting proof. Species were not fixed. Nature was not static. Life was a constant struggle for survival. The tension reached a climax in 1860 at the Oxford University Museum. A public debate was held between Darwin's supporters and his critics. Darwin himself was too ill to attend, but his defender, Thomas Henry Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog, was there. Opposing him was the powerful Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce, nicknamed Soapy Sam for his slick rhetoric. In front of a packed hall, Wilberforce mocked the idea of evolution. He asked Huxley whether he claimed descent from an ape on his grandmother's or his grandfather's side. The audience laughed, but Huxley stood tall. He declared he would rather be descended from an ape than from a man who used his gifts of reason to obscure the truth. The room exploded in cheers. The debate became legendary. It marked the moment Darwin's theory stepped into the public arena. While the world argued, Darwin suffered. His health worsened. He spent much of his time in isolation at his home, Down House in Kent. There he walked slowly in his garden, thinking. He corresponded endlessly with scientists around the world, and he revised his book through 6 editions, adding more evidence, refining his arguments. Darwin was not a firebrand like Huxley. He did not shout in debates. Instead, he let the facts speak. The fossils, the pigeons, the endless variations in plants and animals. Every page of Origin of Species carried weight. It was impossible to dismiss. Still, the personal toll was heavy. Darwin feared condemnation. He worried about his children's reputations. He wrestled with faith. But he never abandoned the truth he had uncovered. And slowly, despite fierce resistance, more and more of the scientific community began to accept his ideas. By the 1870s, Darwin was no longer a radical outsider. He was recognized as one of the greatest thinkers of his age. His later works, including The Descent of Man, directly addressed human evolution, confirming the suspicion that had haunted his critics from the start: the world would never be the same again. By the 1870s, Charles Darwin was a household name, not just in Britain, but across the world. His books had sold thousands of copies. His theory of evolution by natural selection had ignited debates in parlors, churches, and universities. Darwin himself, however, remained modest. He lived quietly at Down House, surrounded by family, gardens, and his endless experiments. He studied earthworms, orchids, and climbing plants with the same passion he had once studied finches and fossils. To Darwin, no creature was too small. Every organism held secrets of nature's grand design. Darwin's work changed biology forever. Before him, science was about describing nature. After him, it was about explaining it. Evolution became the unifying principle of life. It explained why creatures resembled one another, why fossils revealed ancient worlds, why diversity covered the earth. Generations of scientists expanded his ideas. Genetics, DNA, and modern biology confirmed what Darwin had suspected, that all living beings are connected through the long chain of evolution. Darwin's theory also inspired fields beyond biology. Psychology, anthropology, medicine, even sociology began asking new questions. How do humans adapt? What drives behavior? What shapes societies? Darwin had opened the door, and science stepped through it. Yet Darwin remained human. He suffered from illness his entire adult life. He was a devoted husband to Emma Darwin and a loving father to his children. He enjoyed walking in his garden, reflecting on nature. He was gentle, private, and cautious. Despite the storm he unleashed, Darwin never attacked religion directly. He believed science and faith could coexist in separate realms. But his theory, whether he intended it or not, forced humanity to rethink its place in the universe. Were we the pinnacle of creation? Or just another branch on the great tree of life? On April 19, 1882, Charles Darwin died at the age of 73. He passed away peacefully at Down House, surrounded by his family. But his nation recognized his greatness. Darwin was buried in Westminster Abbey beside Isaac Newton, a scientist laid to rest among kings and poets. His epitaph was not carved in stone. It lived in the ideas that transformed our understanding of life itself. Today, Darwin's name is inseparable from evolution. His theory remains one of the foundations of modern science. It explains pandemics. It guides conservation. It shapes medicine and technology. Darwin did not just study life. He revealed its story, a story still unfolding, written in the DNA of every living thing. So next time you see a bird in the sky or an insect on a leaf, remember the man who dared to ask, where did it come from? How did it change? Why does it survive? Darwin gave us the courage to question, the courage to wonder, and the courage to see ourselves not as rulers of nature, but as part of it. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the story of Charles Darwin is not just about the past, it is about us, all of us.